Why do people have to be all complicated and difficult to fully flesh out? Okay, so the reaction to the queer baiting video I did a little while back was a lot bigger than I'd anticipated, and it's made me kind of realize I think there's a little bit of a niche to be filled, and I think by a channel that is not exclusively or even primarily about LGBTQ issues, but will still touch on them, and they are still coming from the perspective of someone who is a member of the LGBTQ populace. So in that case, that means we are going to switch out the look. So, reminder of my credentials and the dog that I have in this race or this fight, or however you particularly use the phrase. I have a fluctuating fluid sense of gender, hence also the shirt. After all that preamble, let's address the question that is, of course, the title of this video. Why are LGBTQ characters so hard to include, so hard to write, so hard to just have? And the thing is, you may have suspected that that title was like being asked sarcastically, like, what's so hard about it? Except I'm kind of asking it sincerely, because I do think there is actually an answer for why it's hard and why it's difficult. Particularly when you compare it to any other kind of inclusion that you want to have of any other kind of diversity, not any other, but most other kinds of diversity. I mean, if you want to compare it to, say, racial diversity, I think it's actually much harder to include more LGBTQ characters in TV, films, comic books, etc. For one very simple reason. To paraphrase a comedian that I'm rather fond of named Vera Kurt, we look like you. And I know that sounds really weird coming from me when I'm presenting like this, but you saw how I looked when the video started. LGBTQ people don't look different as a general rule. So unless you are going to be visualizing the character in an extremely stereotypical and most likely offensive, if you choose to go that way, fashion, then you can't just look at a character and know that they're LGBTQ. So again, going back to what I said, if you want more racial diversity in a story, well, first of all, let me even back up further than that. Including any major character that is outside of the scope of the experience of the writer, the filmmaker, whoever is the main sort of driving force of the story, is difficult. Not impossible, but certainly difficult. And it is also a comfort zone as far as a lot of creators go. As a rule of thumb, most people tend to write as a default themselves. And with the majority of, say, Hollywood being made up of white straight men, that's what we see the most of. It's what they understand the best, is what they're most comfortable writing. That's natural, that's human. So but if you want to include, say, more racial diversity, even if for whatever reason it either doesn't fit the story you're telling, or you're not comfortable writing, say, a black character's experience because you don't feel like you can represent that well, you can still include a racially diverse cast. You can still include black people in, say, your supporting cast by having characters where race is not an essential part of their characterization, or honestly, even if they're just in the background, you can just put them there. Now, is it nice to have more fleshed out characters and have them be, more present and not just there and that's it? Well, yes, absolutely. But that's still something. If all you want to do is just normalize the fact that not every person in an office, in a crowd, in a Starbucks, whatever, is white, you can do that. You can just have them there. And on site, oh, okay, this is a diverse workplace. This is a diverse community. This is a world that this show, movie, comic book is showing me that has racial diversity in it, because I can see it. You don't know that there is sexual orientation or gender identity diversity unless characters say it. And that is something that makes it harder. It makes it more difficult. It makes it more work. Does it make it impossible? No, absolutely not. But it does mean whereas you can simply drop in, say, a member of a different race, or even something like, say, various religions, there are a lot of easy, quick visual signifiers: wearing a crucifix, having a yarmulke. God, took me a second for that. Traditional Muslim dress, which I don't know proper names for, so I'm not going to try because I don't want to screw that up. But there are easy visual signifiers for that. So there's a lot of and obviously if you want to include more women, because women are also often underrepresented in these things, it's easy. Hey, that's a woman. I can look and I can see that. But with us, it has to be made clear. You can't just look and know. Again, unless you're dealing in a really bad stereotype. I mean, I suppose technically it will count as adding diversity if you have characters in the background and like a male character in a really flamboyant shirt going around like this. Please don't. But I suppose that would put them there. But don't do that. So you have the only way that we know that there are LGBTQ characters, the only way that we know we're there is if attention is drawn to it, either through dialogue or through actions of characters. And that does create a couple of issues. The first is, as I said, it's just flat out more work. And if it is just a side character, that is work you may not feel is worth putting into somebody that, in terms of the overall narrative structure, isn't that important, especially if you're working on something like a film. It's going to go through so many draft revisions anyway. What's one of the first things that's going to be cut? Why are we pausing the scene to point out that this character has a boyfriend? Get rid of that. That's just often what happens in writing processes. So, it's work that you put in that it's like, well, why am I bothering? I do think it's work still worth doing, but just acknowledging that it is more work to do. But then there's also the other side of that coin, which is that, unfortunately, because the only way that we can confirm our presence in these stories, in movies and comics and TV, is by pointing it out in some fashion, that regrettably feeds the narrative of shoving diversity down people's throats. And the kinds of audience members who go, God, why do they always have to point it out? Why does the gay character always have to talk about being gay? Because that's the only way you know. That's the only way you know that they're gay. Do you want to argue that it's not realistic? Fine, argue that it's not realistic. But for you to say, just have a gay character, just don't have them say that they're gay. Okay, fine, but how are we supposed to know that a character's gay or lesbian or bi or genderqueer or whatever? It has to be pointed out. That's the only way to have it be confirmed. That was a big part of what I ranted about in the gender and the queer baiting video. So that, again, just makes it one more reason for writers, directors, whoever, to not bother. Because it's a lot of work. And depending on the demographics that your finished piece of work is aimed at, it could be possibly alienating to a portion of the audience that you want on your side, if only for financial purposes. And that makes it, to be completely pragmatic about it, not worth the bother. But I did want to talk about this. I did want to address this because I feel like I need to address both sides. From people who are kind of more or less on my side of the whole thing, going, why are we so hard to find? There is a reason. You can say it's not the best reason in the world, but there is a reason. And for people on the other side going, why does it have to keep being said? Well, this is why. Now, can it be oversaid? Well, yeah. Sure. If we're talking, say, a TV show as opposed to like a film, if a character gets established as gay in, I don't know, say their second appearance, but then it keeps getting reiterated as if it's being pointed out for the first time every time they show up, but their romantic relationship is not actually part of the ongoing narrative. Yeah, that's clunky and that's unnecessary and that's overdoing it. So yes, that is possible. But you have to at least grant us the first time pointing it out, because otherwise you don't know we're there. And you know what it's like when we're supposedly there and you don't know it? That's called being in the closet. And being in the closet really freaking sucks. So yeah, we would like to not do that and not have to do that, like, ever. And I think another byproduct of this is because you have to put the extra attention to highlight this, like I said, it makes it awkward, because what are your options? Either it's a minor character, which is usually a good way to at least, have base level diversity. So it's not just a sea of white male faces. You can just add diverse characters in minor roles, but for you to know there's an LGBTQ character, you do have to add this extra emphasis, and it's weird to do that for what would otherwise be a minor character. The alternative is to have one of the major characters be LGBTQ. But unfortunately, that can lead to its own issue, which is that for whatever reason, it really does seem like filmmakers, writers, etc. don't want to do that unless the main thrust of the story has a character's sexual preference or gender identity as, like, the point. Unless it's God, I hate that I'm about to say this term, a gay movie, it's pretty atypical for them to point out that a major character is gay or lesbian or trans or what have you. And like I said, I hate even using that phrase, but I know it exists as a sentiment. Like, I know that you can go... I was going to say go to the video store. God, dated reference! But I know that you can go onto things like Netflix or Amazon and see things categorized as LGBT movies. And that is kind of a market, which frustrates me, partly because I usually don't like the kinds of stories those are telling, because they're almost always, look how hard it is being this thing, or, they're romances, which rarely hold my interest, or they're just really stereotypical and they do well enough because there isn't enough variety in that genre. It shouldn't be a genre, but it counts as a genre. And that's one of the things that frustrates me, is because I would love to be able to see a reflection of myself in a story that I actually want to see. I'm a geek. I like superheroes. I like Star Wars. I like sci-fi. I like fantasy. I don't love drama. Like, I don't mean like as an element of a story. I mean like the drama section of a streaming service. The things that get filed under drama. They don't hold my interest. But movies where the main character is LGBTQ, it's basically a subset of that, of the drama category. And again, I think there's a number of reasons for this. There's creators who aren't comfortable telling these stories. There's the fact that there aren't enough LGBTQ people in the industry who are able to lend their voice and tell these stories. And more often than not, if they are going to tell these stories, the only way they're allowed to do it is if it's the dedicated point of the story. I'm projecting to a certain extent. Obviously, I don't live in Hollywood. I've never taken a meeting with a studio executive, but I do actually know people who work in various aspects of the industry. So I don't feel that the characterization I'm about to make is hugely off the mark. But if you show up to a pitch meeting or a script discussion with an executive, with a producer, with a director even, and you go, so here's this high-octane action story, and the action hero's gay. That's not what it's about, but he's gay. And at some point, somebody in that room is going to go, does he have to be gay? Like, we don't want to make it an issue movie. We want an action movie. Let's drop that. Let's make it clean. Let's make it easier. Let's make it cleaner. And that it's a combination of bottom line and creator, artist comfort levels. And I'm not saying that directors, writers, or other creators who aren't comfortable trying to tell those stories should be forced to tell them. Of course not. If you're not comfortable telling that story, don't tell that story. But unfortunately, it's easy for us to get left behind because you have to go out of your way to acknowledge us. You can't just drop us in the background and have anybody actually know we're there. That's not completely exclusive to LGBTQ. There are other sort of certain areas where that crosses over. There are invisible disabilities that don't present in the form of a wheelchair or leg braces. Certainly anyone who is neuroatypical. I don't want to say mental health issues because I feel like that phrase has a lot of stigma to it, but people who have those sorts of issues, it's hard for them to get representation for the same reason, because you only know that a character is like that if somebody points it out. Autism, another solid example. So it almost never shows up unless the entire thing is about that. And it is harder. It needs to be done, guys. And I'm not saying it's not going to suck sometimes, and I'm not going to say it's not never going to be clunky, and I'm not saying there aren't going to be times where you're just going to be painful, like, oh, for the love of God, stop. But we need to hit a level of normalization, either behind the scenes or with the art that's being put out, ideally both. Because until we either get people in positions of being the ones telling these stories who are comfortable handling these characters, or we just sort of get it to the point where audiences don't go, whoa, that was out of place, when a character goes, oh yeah, my boyfriend and I, we had a fight, but it'll be okay. But it's just a minor note. It's just something said in the scene, like literally just one line to establish that this character is gay. Gay people exist. It needs to be there so that people can get over it. Because the fact that some people do react to even well-handled instances where it is just a tossed off line, where it is done as organically as possible, and they still go, God, why they gotta put that in there? We need to keep putting it in there until you stop reacting like that, until it's no longer abnormal, until it doesn't stand out anymore. It's more work. It's hard. There is, like I said, there is a reason that it doesn't happen all that much, but I do know there is also effort going into it. Unfortunately, as kind of touched on the queer baiting video, it is often cynical, misguided effort, but there is effort. And I've said before, and I will continue to argue, I would rather have questionable, iffy, this is not the best representation than no representation, because you can take something that isn't great and work at it and make it better. It gives you a foundation, gives you something to build off of. When there is no representation, there is nothing to build off of. You simply don't exist. And when you're talking about the LGBTQ experience, being ignored and being made to feel like you don't exist is a major part of the issues of trying to live your truth. So I think I'll wrap up this one on that note. This is gonna be, I think, a monthly feature, because I don't want this kind of topic to overrun the channel by any means, but I also, I started actually sort of sketching out topics related to all this that I feel like I have something to say about, and I think monthly is a good pace for something like this, so that I can talk about these things and possibly reach an audience that isn't always hearing these sorts of things talked about, maybe. But also, again, like I said, not having it overrun the channel. It's not going to become the primary feature. Me letting my hair down will still be the exception rather than the rule. But that'll do it for this one, folks. So whatever thoughts you have on this, keep it respectful. Even if you disagree with me, I am fine to hear you out and leave comments in place that disagree with me, as long as you are not using pejorative terms and issuing personal attacks either to me or anyone else. So keep it civil. Whether you agree, disagree, whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. There's all the stuff to do. There's the usual, the likes and subscribe. I have a Patreon, naturally. Links for that, plus my Twitter and a podcast and t-shirts, etc. It's all down in the description. So until next time, this council is adjourned.